You are listening to 13 Past Midnight with Steve Stockton.
Tonight's story is another one from my book, My Strange World. And for this audio rendition, I'm going to call it Dreaming of the Dead. Now, the death of a family member is never an easy thing to deal with. But having the precognition of that death, even if only for a moment, can easily add to the devastation. I remember it was summer. I was a teenager, and lounging about doing nothing was satisfying due to the extreme heat and humidity that year. I was just barely in my teens, so not really old enough for a summer job or old enough to drive or do anything even remotely fun. I'd finished breakfast and had piled onto the couch in our family room to watch television. Apparently bored with whatever fare MTV or HBO had to offer pre-noon, I promptly drifted off back to sleep. I was in the middle of a strange dream. It was one of those where you're awake enough to know that you're dreaming, but not fully awake enough to wake up, as it were. In the dream, I was surrounded by a thick, inky blackness. My first thought was, this is what it would be like to be inside a coffin. I also noticed a low murmuring of voices in the background, both male and female. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could tell by the tone of the voices that something somber and serious was being discussed. In addition to the sounds of polite conversation, I could hear the faint strains of instrumental music in the background, and there was a scent of flowers. And then it hit me. What I was experiencing was a crowd gathered to pay their respects at a funeral home. A sadness washed over me as I had the grim realization that someone had died, someone close. And then the ringing of the telephone jolted me awake. My mom picked it up, and I groggily made my way into the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face, when I heard a piteous wail from the kitchen where the phone was, and then the sound of deep, heaving sobbing. I raced out of the bathroom and into the kitchen and found my mother crying heavily. Momentarily, she quietly placed the telephone handset back into the cradle. "Little Harry is dead," she said between sobs. Little Harry was my uncle's son. He was very young, only 7 years old. It was later found that he had perished tragically in a house fire. His mother, who was divorced from my uncle, shared custody of Harry and another child from a different marriage. She had fallen asleep while smoking in bed, and the mattress had smoldered for hours rather than bursting into full flame. All three had died of smoke inhalation. The mattress had eventually stopped smoking and gone out, and that was the reason that the bodies had gone undiscovered for several days, according to the county coroner. This scenario bothered me for years. I couldn't understand that if I was going to have a precognitive dream, why couldn't I have it in time to help someone out? Granted, the boys and their mother had already been dead for days when I had the dream, but to have a dream like that, only to be awakened by the phone ringing to deliver the sad news of the death in the family, weighed on me heavily. Years later, I had another experience with a precognitive dream that springs readily to mind. This time, instead of going back down for a nap after breakfast, I was actually going to bed at a normal time. That alone should have been a warning that something extraordinary was about to happen. I've been a notorious night owl since childhood, and as an adult rarely get to bed before 2 or 3 in the morning. As a writer, overcast, rainy, gray days and the dead of night from midnight onward are my most creative times. There's just something about it that inspires me to crank up some 80s goth or synth pop with a bit of new wave and write like mad, sometimes only stopping from sheer exhaustion or when I notice the first thin rays of light beginning to break over the horizon. So here I was actually going to bed around 11 in the evening. I was unusually tired and ready to snooze. I don't think my head had more than hit the pillow when I found myself in the middle of a strange, vivid dream. I was on a busy construction site. obviously somewhere in the south, based on the preponderance of red clay mud that seemed to be everywhere. The site was a den of activity, and people in jeans, plaid shirts, and work boots and hard hats scurried to and fro, each with their own assignment or task to be accomplished. I glanced off to my left and noticed an impressive stack of concrete drainage pipes. On closer inspection, I could see that although the huge pipes, each probably measuring 3 feet across, had been arranged in a pyramid stack, and they weren't secured. "That's dangerous," I said to myself in the dream. "Those pipes could collapse and—" Before I could get the words out of my mouth in the dream, I watched in horror as the stack of pipes did indeed collapse, just as a man was walking by. The pipes rolled over him and bounced off down the hill, coming to rest against a huge piece of yellow construction machinery. The man's mangled, twisted, crushed body was the most vivid and graphic thing I've ever seen in a dream. I'd literally watched him popped like a grape, with huge quantities of blood and organs at both ends. I turned away and retched, and then I sprang wide awake. I sat up in bed, drenched in cold sweat and shivering despite the heat. I must have cried out, as I'd awakened my then-girlfriend as well. "Are you okay?" she asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I rasped, my throat suddenly too dry and constricted. "I just saw somebody become one." I puzzled over this for the rest of the night, unable to go back to sleep, although I came to find that I'd only been asleep for about 20 minutes when that awful dream happened. I felt that the dream was a warning, that someone was going to die on a construction site. But where? When? About 3 weeks later, I had my answer. I read in the paper where in a nearby city, about 90 miles away, just such an accident had occurred. An unsecured stack of concrete pipes had broken away, crushing a construction worker to death on the work site. I was devastated. It happened almost exactly as I had dreamed it. Why did I have this dream? What good is this kind of insight if you're powerless to stop anything from happening? I actually struggled with this for years, but one day while meditating, it finally dawned on me. The epiphany I had was that basically, no matter if we know the future, some things are just meant to be, in their own time and in their own place. My bit of second sight, if you will, merely served to increase the belief in things that I just knew without any way of knowing. It taught me that some things you just cannot and should not change, no matter how badly you want. And to paraphrase the words of Albert Einstein, God does not roll dice. Have you ever had a dream of something that came true? A horrible death or some catastrophe or strange occurrence? I had another similar dream about a motorcycle rider that's in the new book from Cisco Murdoch and I. It just came out in paperback. We're All Children in the Wilderness of the Afterlife, a guided tour through a haunted life. You can find it on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. Gives one pause for reflection.